Thank you very much, everybody, for coming and attending this afternoon. We've got a tremendous guest that we've got, a person that I've known for, oh my gosh, 16, 17 years, I'd say, Jay Feinman, from a distinguished professor of law from Rutgers, a person who's been on CNN, Fox, I think, the New York Times, and just about everywhere. He has the book Delay, Deny, Defend. Why insurance companies don't pay claims and what you can do about it. And that was published 15 years ago. Jay, I think I interviewed you 15 years ago. I don't know. Do you recall that?
I do indeed.
I mean, it was a lot different time. You had to do everything in person. And I think we were at the First Party Claims Conference up in outside of Providence, Rhode Island, when that first came and it seems like, eons ago, but you've continued to work. And for everybody, he is just a prolific scholar, written more work's been cited by the United States Supreme Court. He's just one of the best in his field, and has really dedicated his entire life to the study of contracts, insurance law, and various theories of tort liability. And as a result of that study, we're all much better for it. But Jay, I'm really happy that you came here and you're joining us this afternoon. It's a little bit different, I think, for most people that might think about insurance as just being insurance agents and lawyers doing stuff and insurance claims payments, but actually somebody that's in academia spending their entire time studying insurance law and how we might make insurance better for all of us. So thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I often say that professionals, like people in insurance and lawyers and academics, it's not that one or the other understands the subject better. It's that they understand it differently. And if we can get together and talk about it, we both learn something.
Well, so this afternoon, for everybody who's in the audience, if you have a question, all you got to do is go up to that question button. I've been told if you punch on that and you enter your questions, we'll go along and we'll try to answer them and on the subject matters we go along today. And I encourage everybody to do so. If you listen very intently, I guarantee you're going to pick up something that you will not have known before, and also something that might help you out in this crazy insurance world. And I really do mean it's crazy. So Jay, just to start it off, because I can tell you, I think your celebrity status seemed to pick back up as a result of a crazy, tragic incident. When did you hear that your book, Delay, Deny, Defend, was cited in connection with that crazy, tragic murder of the United Healthcare CEO? And what was your reaction to it? And did you have reporters just blowing up your phone or what?
Well, I woke up one December morning and I thought, gee, it was strange. I have sort of 50 emails from people in the media. And then I checked the news and found out what it was. And of course, it was totally bizarre. And as you say, quite tragic. And I decided nothing good was going to come out of immediate comments. Most of the people didn't want in-depth studies of why people are upset about insurance companies. They wanted a 15-second reaction, particularly when people online began celebrating the killer as a heroic vigilante, which I think is crazy. So I stayed out of that, but I think it was a useful event because it brought insurance into the headlines. And as all of us here today know, it doesn't happen that often, and we need to see more of it.
Did it impact in any way on your view of your work? I mean, all of a sudden somebody's citing your book and, just considering the unintended consequences of, I know you never intended that to ever have happened, but, from a very human, consequence, how did it impact you?
Well, I was very glad that, at least so far as been reported, nobody has found a direct tie between the book and the alleged killer. There was the obvious connection from the delay, deny, depose on the bullet casings, because unintended consequences are just absurd. For me, what it did was reinforced the notion that we need to stop thinking about insurance in silos. right? You do property insurance practically all of the time. There are
Right.
people who do life all the time, particularly the people who do health all the time. And I don't think there's been enough cross-fertilization because we see very similar issues arising in each of the different areas. And we can learn about solutions from one to the other, or we can think about the problems more generally. So that's one of the things that it did for me.
When I was a little bit younger in my career, I did do more types of insurance. I had more life insurance cases and health insurance cases. In my book, Pay Up, I talked about a woman that had a very aggressive form of cervical cancer that, the algorithms for the health carrier just refused to pay. It led finally somebody that was looking at it, but I found this only looking at the claim files. Help, help, help. It's obvious this should get paid, but I can't get the computer to change its mind.
Yes.
From and it's kind of weird when you talk about property insurance just generally. That's one thing, and people in our business might say, well, it's just business. But man, when it gets to be your health, I think that becomes pretty real when all of a sudden you're not getting the type of benefits and payment from your insurance company. It might mean a matter of life and death.
Sure, and people have more experience with health insurance than with others. Right? Something like 6% of homeowners will file a claim this year, and many of them will be inconvenient but not catastrophic. Now, as you know, when it is a catastrophic loss, flood, fire, windstorm, hail, then they understand how important their insurance is. But people have much more experience with health insurance. It's much more newsworthy because of stories like the one you talk about. So it's helpful to remind people what you're buying is security, right? It's not an economic proposition. It's not a financial transaction. It's a social proposition where we come together to take care of each other through various business mechanisms. And it doesn't matter if it's health, homeowners, life, disability, in which there was huge scandal with claims denials. We need to make the system work better.
Well, talking about things that have hit some, national media attention, we had Josh Hawley just a little over a month ago have Senate hearings, and he brought on a number of whistleblowers, and I guess let's say two whistleblowers, but the families that also were impacted by it, and then had a couple of executives from State Farm and Allstate Insurance Company came out. Do you think that these whistleblowers are having some impact upon bringing to attention what some of the criticisms that you brought about or talked about in your book?
Well, for sure. I mean, a couple reasons. One, you have a conservative Republican who comes out with strong challenges to industry. And I imagine because he was either moved by the story or he heard it from his constituents who had similar sorts of problems. The other dimension of this is that's how politicians hear about things. Right, there are lobbyists and there's campaign contributions, and they're enormously important. But you have a number of situations in which people in their congressional district or people in their state or legislative district have lots of problems. They don't know who to turn to, and they turn to their elected representatives. There was a bill a few years ago about flood insurance reform, co-sponsored by Senator Kennedy of Louisiana, one of the most conservative Republicans, and Senator Warren of Massachusetts, one of the most progressive Democrats. Why? Because they both represent coastal states. And there's a lot of political discussion. Wouldn't it be a better world if we could all agree on stuff? Well, we're not agreeing on much stuff, but you have to protect people when they have health insurance, when they have flood damage, when they have fire damage. Yeah, that's a pretty common concern.
So should we, I'm just thinking this through. Should we keep encouraging people to come out for whistleblowers? Should we make laws that protect insurance company employees, independent adjusters, when they know of unethical acts, that they should be encouraged and don't have to worry about being blacklisted or having some type of negative repercussions when they come clean about what's really going on? Should we promote this?
Yeah, I think we should promote this. And we should also promote something that's your day job, which is aggressive litigation against insurance companies. Because I tell a lot of stories and have a lot of facts, statistics, and delay, deny, defend. How did I get that? Well, I got that mostly from lawyers and insurance expert witnesses and whistleblowers who produced the documents, who took the depositions. And look, one of the ways regulators have been slipping, I think, they do some things really well. One thing they do not do well is supervised claim practices, and in particular, generating public information. And if they're not going to do it, whistleblowers have to do it, lawyers have to do it, and otherwise, because it's just not there otherwise.
So, I mean, what do you say about that? Why is it that the NAIC is so ineffective with respect to claim practices? And then what should we do about it? What should they do about it? What can we do better?
Yeah, so that's a big issue. And I know something about the NAIC, but I'm not a politics expert. But, there's this theme in the literature of regulatory capture. Regulators designed to supervise industries often get captured by them. Now, some people think that has a negative connotation. They get bought off. Lots of insurance commissioners end up working for the industry. Yeah, there's that. But I don't actually think that's the key thing going on. The key thing is, who do they get their information from? Who do they hear from day after day? Who produces the study? Well, it's the insurance industry. So naturally, they're more inclined to draw on that information, take that point of view, and so forth. And that's why where consumer interests and industry interests align, regulators do a great job. For example, regulators do a great job in making sure insurance companies stay solvent. I think the number is something like last year, 8 out of 2,500 property and casualty insurers across the country went insolvent, because nobody wants that to happen. Where the interests of industry and consumers diverge, like providing more information about coverage, which policyholders generally don't understand, or providing more information about claims practices. Okay, State Farm, Allstate, Liberty Mutual, all of them, let's see the numbers in a particular market for a particular kind of insurance. What percentage of the claims get closed without payments? What percentage of the claims get closed in 30, 60, 90, 180 days? What percentage of the claims go to litigation? If regulators aren't going to do the direct supervision, at least they should be able to provide the information so consumers know how to buy insurance better.
So what about market conduct studies? Should we change the way that those are being done? I mean, if you're saying that they're ineffective, maybe it's the methodology that they're using about claims practices, and I've often wondered about market conduct studies.
So I think the way market conduct studies are structured is fine. The way market conduct studies are used is often not. So there have been some blockbuster MCEs about claims practices of a particular insurance company or claims practices after a disaster. Too often they focus on trivial stuff. Oh, did you give the notice within 30 days or was it really 45 days? And that sort of thing. And I was just reading all the market conduct studies in New Jersey over the last couple of years. And, I live in New Jersey, like New Jersey government. It's just not what the really important stuff is. So I think if you look at the market conduct handbook, which is like 700 pages long, it's there, but it's what they choose to do with it.
So how would you change that?
How do you change the regulator's focus, right? I mean, look, so that dimension of it is a political question. What should regulators be doing? What should legislators be doing? What should NCOIL be doing as well as NAIC?
Well, should the legislatures be passing laws that would allow the regulators to do more expansive discovery into the internal claim practices of insurance companies?
Well, I think so. In a number of situations, legislatures give regulators the authority to do lots of stuff and then leave it to the regulators to see whether or not the stuff is done for its best impact. Maybe they should direct more. What we have seen in a number of states, Colorado, for example, is the legislature has stepped in to mandate things like disclosures when the regulator has not, or maybe doesn't have the statutory authority to do that. Yeah, I think there needs to be more political action, but and I always emphasize this is political in two senses, right? It's sort of ordinary, everyday government, politics, elections, appointments, that sort of thing. It's also political in the sense that we're making fundamental choices here, right? We're deciding who wins and who loses. We're deciding how we want to allocate resources in society, who ought to be protected. And that's what politics is all about. Now, the tough political question is, how do you mobilize more policyholder side folks, insurance consumers, climate change advocates who are deeply involved in this to influence gubernatorial elections, legislative elections, all of that sort of thing. I leave that up to the more politically engaged folks, but that's what needs to happen.
Well, you talked about one set of people, and I appreciate it because you essentially indicated it's what I do for a living, and some of my colleagues digging into what I call claim practice cases. A lot of people call them bad faith cases. They honestly ought to be called lack of good faith cases. Somehow, as soon as we started calling them bad faith, It's almost like, well, everybody's bad that's being involved in these, versus really it's a breach of an obligation of good faith, and it just softens it a little bit. But I think the softening is important, and especially because I've got to ask you, one of the things that's frustrated me when I first started as a young attorney, this area of the law really was the breach of the obligation of good faith and fair dealing. And then the judges in some of the states started putting in, well, we have a right to be wrong. The insurance company has a right to be wrong regarding its decisions, and it has a right to be wrong regarding what it does, so long as it's reasonably wrong in what it does. And to me, this world of reasonably is just, almost run over. So you don't see bad faith lawsuits, even though there's really good, what would be, you would think, good case law, until they put this new standard in there. And there's just nobody winning bad faith lawsuits in some jurisdictions. What, kind of curious, you've studied the law, you studied this portion of insurance law, and what's the bottom line on that, Jay?
Yeah, so I will give you what I think ought to be the bottom line, but let me first emphasize how important that question is. So I have this academic article on the regulation of insurance claim practices, which I don't recommend non-academics read, but maybe regulators. But part of that article is about litigation as regulation. Look, in every other area you can think of, products liability. Okay, there's Consumer Product Safety Commission, and the states regulate stuff, and the federal government regulates safety in cars. But what has an important role in regulating product safety, including auto safety, and practically everything else? Well, people know if they do the wrong thing, they're going to get sued. And if they do the wrong thing a lot, they're going to get sued a lot, and it's going to cost them a lot of money. So we provide an incentive for product manufacturers to make safe products, for example. And therefore, we need to think about the same thing in insurance. Yeah, there's legislation. Yeah, there's regulation. It's lawyers like Chip Merlin pursuing claims practices litigation that have an important regulatory role. Because if there's enough litigation and there's enough judgments against insurance companies, they're going to change their practices, just like auto manufacturers do. Okay, so now What does the landscape look like? Well, in about half dozen states, give or take, an insurance company is liable for more than what they promised under the policy if they act unreasonably. And that's important because, look, if at the end of the line, at the end of the delay, deny, defend chain, all the policyholder gets is what they were entitled to in the first place, well, they get nothing for the delay, they get nothing for the emotional harm, they get nothing to pay their lawyer, and therefore a lot of those cases don't get litigated at all.
I mean, I hate to interrupt you, but it'd be like a bank robber stealing from the bank, and the bank goes back and sues the bank robber to get its money back, and nothing happens to the bank robber. As a matter of fact, the bank then has to pay their own attorneys, to go get the money back from the bank robber.
It's exactly like that. Now, look, and the problem you raised in your question is, I said, okay, that's half a dozen states, give or take. In most states, in many states, you can't recover anything other than you were owed in the first place. In many states, you can recover that only if the insurance company acted unreasonably and they did so intentionally or recklessly. Now, sometimes that happens, but as you say, boy, is it hard to prove that. Boy, is it hard to convince a court that not only, insurance companies can make mistakes. I don't have a problem with that. And I don't think they should be liable if they make mistakes, as long as they're reasonable mistakes. If they have a pattern and practice of changing adjusters' reports, as the whistleblowers claim, or unreasonably dragging out claims, you got to make them pay. It's the only thing that provides incentives. And therefore, we need more states, not just to change the power the regulators have, change the power the policyholders and their lawyers have.
Huh. So, I mean, you live in New Jersey. When was the last time you can think of that there was a first party, bad faith victory on behalf of a policyholder in New Jersey?
So the leading New Jersey case, I think was either 1980, I think it was 1985, may have been 1995. The last time I looked, which was a couple of years ago. Since then, there have been, I think it was 5 plaintiff verdicts in more than 20 years.
Well,
because the standard is just too high.
It's 1980. Yeah, it's 1985. It's
right.
That's getting 40 years.
Yeah. No, it's just, and that's true in every state, right? Except the ones where you have stronger remedies.
So, suppose a lawmaker came up to you, a state lawmaker were to walk up to you and said, hey, I'm sick and tired of this. I want to put an end to this so that my constituents don't have to face this anymore. And they know that, and the insurance companies know, if they've done the wrong thing to my constituents are going to be able to sue them or something's going to happen to them. What should I do as a legislator? What would you tell them?
Well, let me put in a plug for my sponsor. I would tell them first to go to CRR, which stands for Center for Risk and Responsibility, .rutgers.edu, where we have a number of relatively concrete programs. Specifically for this, I would say the standard for insurance company, what they like to call extra contractual liability, paying something more than what they owed under the policy, should be if they acted unreasonably, without any intent or recklessness requirement. And then I'm sort of less concerned about what happens then. You can do that in terms of punitive damages. I would fit that within the state's system. But one of so change the standard, change the recovery. Those are the two keys.
Should we be doing this at a federal level? Should we be considering doing it at a federal level?
Yeah. Good luck with that. As we know, state regulators and many state legislators who are involved in this consider federal intervention as an existential threat. They don't want the Federal Insurance Office even collecting information about insurance around the country, much less regulating. And I think they have sufficient influence in Congress that that's a non-starter.
Well, I know you think it's a
So,
non-starter. Just because it's a non-starter doesn't mean it not ought to be the way it is. And I hear you loud and clear. But so what's your true feelings on this, Jay? I mean, you've been around. To me, it seems like if the states can't stop it, then we need to find something that can.
well, if I were trying to describe a plan of political mobilization and action, which is nothing I'm particularly good at, I would say, okay, I'm going to target a few states because at least it's possible there. I don't think federal regulation is possible in the near future. So I would strongly support maintaining the FIO, Federal Insurance Office, and giving them more authority and encouraging them to collect and report more information, because they're really the ones that have pushed the NAIC data call about homeowners insurance, which I think is not nearly strong enough, but would not have happened at all without the FIO. But in terms of the politics, people know this better than I think the state level is the only realistic avenue. Now, that's true of claims practices. It's true of ordinary regulation, like disclosure of information, with the single exception of health insurance, where the Affordable Care Act creates a great model for what insurance disclosures ought to look like in homeowners. And we have a proposal for that too. The only federal role I see even marginally likely is with respect to disasters, because disasters are not just a California problem, Florida problem, Texas problem, Minnesota problem. They're a national problem. So maybe we can get to a federal solution there. But that's just the politics of the landscape at the moment.
Well, until the politics, changes, it looks like we're kind of stuck with state law and trying to enforce these, at least at a litigation standpoint. Larry Bache asked, Larry Bache, a lawyer at Merlin Law Group, great
Right.
attorney, asked, should the standard be intentional or vexatious, or should the standard be unreasonableness? What should the standard really be with respect to insurance company wrongfulness? What is it when they should be held liable? Jay, you've studied this, you looked at it. I mean, what's really what will stop the quote bank robber from robbing the bank?
Right. The standard should be reasonableness. And if you think about it, that's the standard we apply not just to businesses in other situations, but ordinary folks. So I was out driving this morning, and I was sort of 3 cars back on the entrance ramp to the highway, and I had to stop because the first 2 cars had a fender bender. Didn't look too serious. Okay, if that was a more serious accident, looked like the sort of thing they were just going to fix themselves, who would be responsible for paying? The one who had acted unreasonably, like not paying attention if you were following too fast the car in front of you. Even more important, where you're not just talking about an individual driving, but you're talking about an industry which, you can be momentarily inattentive. They plan this whole thing out, right? They have a structure for claims, and it should be a reasonable structure. And therefore, I would take intentional, vexatious, all of that stuff out of the equation altogether. And if they act unreasonably, they have to pay just like an unreasonable driver. And the other dimension to that, which is another way the NAIC and many insurance commissioners have fallen down. The NAIC has a Model Unfair Claims Practices Act, which has been adopted in some version in every state. And it says, here are the things that are unreasonable, unfair claims practices, like unreasonable delay, or not paying when you know a claim is owed, or a bunch of stuff. If it happens so frequently that it's a business practice. That is, to take your analogy, you can rob the bank once, but you can't rob the bank repeatedly. I would take that out of the equation too, because people need to be compensated, and insurance companies need to be given incentives to act properly.
The bank robber, we shouldn't have to go ahead and wait until the bank robber goes and does it as a general business practice. They do it just once, they should be penalized right away.
And by the way, I'm not demonizing insurance companies. My theory of humanity is very few people get up in the morning and say, I'm going to do something evil today. No, people get up in the morning and say, I'm going to go to my job and I'm going to do good today. Like, I'm going to provide security, people. But, I got to keep prices down, which means keeping loss payments down, because otherwise people won't afford insurance. And if I pay off this guy, it means somebody else's premiums go up, or everybody's a fraudster, or whatever is going on in their heads. I don't care what's going on in their heads. I care what they do in the world. So it's not, I had lunch with an insurance company CEO once, and he walks into the restaurant and says, oh, you're the guy that hates insurance companies. And I say, no, just the bad ones. And most of them are good, but they need their practices to change.
Do you think it's getting more and more difficult for some of these major carriers to be really good when they're under such financial pressure and competitive pressure with one another, that their margins are so tight? They all advertise on the basis of price, and the only way you're going to get price down is, if you're all paying claims the same way and fully paying and promptly paying, obviously one way you can get around that is not pay the claims that way. And the second is, well, we're not going to advertise it, but what we sell is a slightly different product that doesn't pay as much. Do you think these competitive pressures are really what's driving some of this?
100%. That's how the story starts out. Okay, let's control our largest cost, which is loss cost. But now think about what's happened in the last few years. Well, we see the effects of climate change in lots of places, which increases insurance costs. Inflation for construction costs has far exceeded the cost of inflation generally, and that increases loss costs. And interest rates have been low, which means they're getting less investment income. So exactly, insurance companies, property insurance companies in particular, are in a tough position because lots of them are losing money or not making much money, and that's not sustainable. So what do? Well, they drop unprofitable policyholders, but as you say, they also get more aggressive on denying claims. And something else that's much less known but is extremely important is they're cutting back on coverage. And this is not big cutbacks like happened in the 60s. We're not going to cover flood anymore. This is a little bit here and there. Like, okay, we used to cover your roof at replacement cost. Now we're going to recover your roof at a depreciation schedule. So if you have a 20-year-old roof, you're going to get, I don't remember what the number is, 30% of the cost of the replacement, and you have to make up the difference. Or if we have to match new shingles to old shingles, we're not going to cover the matching. Or a dozen other things that you could name off the top of your head. And people don't know this because people don't pay any attention to the details of that when they're buying their insurance. And it's just another way of cutting costs. And, people are surprised at the end of the story. So this is a slightly different area, but Kaiser Family Foundation, the best research group in health insurance, 70% of the people who were denied full payment of their claims were surprised because they didn't know what their health insurance covered. Well, I would bet heavily the percentage is the same in homeowners insurance because I don't know what their insurance covers.
Well, I would say even for property insurance, because you don't use it. Health insurance, people have health claims all the time. And you might talk about what exactly those words mean. You don't think about it until you have to have a surgery. I don't think people think about what those words mean all the time and the full impact. And who can think of the myriad of the ways losses are going to happen in advance and fully understand the policies. I study, and I challenge any judge, I study these things for a living all day long, and I'm pressed sometimes to understand, and I have to go back and look and study. There's just no way anybody can. So I hear you loud and clear on that. Jay, it seems to me that there's a regulatory problem with respect to, we talk about the rates. The insurance companies can take a look at the rates, but they don't seem to look at the policies or the products that are being sold out there. It seems to be a huge regulatory issue.
It's a huge regulatory issue. And people should understand it's not new for regulators to dictate the terms of coverage. So one of the great innovations in property insurance was the 1943, right? New York fire insurance policy. Standard policy in the statute, which has been adopted in a number of states. And the law says, if you're selling fire insurance, you have to at least meet this minimum. And I know Ed Eshu of your firm has written a number of great articles, blog posts on it. People should go look at it. Well, that's been happening for a very long time. Affordable Care Act specifies coverage. Oh, by the way, no matter what you think of the Affordable Care Act, I don't know almost anybody who thinks, oh, they shouldn't have said you can't exclude coverage for pre-existing conditions. So yeah, we do this. We've done this for a long time. And that's the first step. The most egregious cutbacks on coverage, protection caps, can be taken care of by legislation if the insurance commissioner is going to do it. The other step, sorry, go ahead.
I say, would you be in favor of a minimum all risk insurance, a standard all risk insurance policy that covers at least this with these terms?
Absolutely. And by the way, I think insurance companies ought to be making more profits because people ought to be buying more insurance and better insurance. So, for example, too many people buy low deductible insurance. If you have a $500 deductible in your homeowner's insurance policy, you got to be out of your mind because you're never going to file a $600 claim. And if you have a $50,000 claim, the last $500 doesn't matter. But people aren't good shoppers. Okay, so we should follow the model of the standard fire insurance policy and include minimum standards, all risk, either in the regulations or in the statute, one way or another. The other thing I think we ought to do is we ought to make it easier for people to shop. As you said earlier, people overwhelmingly shop for insurance by price. That doesn't matter too much in auto insurance because in a given state, auto insurance tend to be pretty much the same. Homeowners insurance, that's a terrible idea. Now, as you just said, the funny, not in the funny haha, but funny in you got to be kidding me sense. Lots of states have plain language laws. Homeowners insurance policy have to be written in plain language so somebody with a 10th grade education can read it. I don't care. They can't understand it. If Chip Merlin has to sit there and think, well, wait a minute, what situations might arise? I don't care how clear the language is. Even if they got it, they wouldn't read it. They couldn't understand what was going to happen. So what we ought to do is we ought to emulate the Affordable Care Act, where if you go to healthcare.gov or the state marketplaces, they have a great template that they require health plans. Here's what's covered and here's what's not. The really important stuff in plain language. And then they have examples. Oh, Susie is having a baby. Well, here's how much that's going to cost under this plan. Here's how much that's going to cost on the other plan. Joe is diabetic. Here's how much it's going to cost. And again, it's not that hard. We have concrete proposals, crr.rutgers.edu, or just, Insurance Rutgers will get you there. If they're not going to regulate, at least give consumers the tools. And by the way, most consumers aren't going to use that. I'm not a Pollyanna, but what's going to happen is now Consumer Reports does really good surveys of satisfactions. They're going to rate homeowners insurance policies the way we started to do on our website. A couple years ago, my dishwasher caught fire. Pulled out the power, no problem, no damage, except the dishwasher itself. Didn't know anything about dishwashers, didn't want to know anything. Went to Consumer Reports. Okay, here's how this one ranks for quiet, how long it takes to wash dishes, how good a job it does. Yeah, we'll see some of that coming out if regulators were doing their jobs.
So, Kathy, I see we've got some questions here, and I love our audience out there. I love y'all putting in your questions, and I saw at the very top, I have a problem is, Kathy, if you can say what this is, it'll help us out some. Amy Bach has a question, but I can't pull out the entire question out. I only get the first 2 lines. Are you there to help us in any way?
Yeah, I would love to help you. If you have the choice between the policyholder having coverage for claim prep expenses so they can prove up their loss values versus having the right to recover attorney fees where the insurer behaves unreasonably, which would be a stronger consumer protection?
Wow.
Amy. Thanks,
That's
Amy.
a great question. And if Amy doesn't know the answer, I surely don't know the answer. So let me give you the academic's response, which is, I would like to know a little bit more about what's happening on the ground, because what I care about long term is changing the behavior of insurance companies. So if there would be lots and lots of cases in which the claim prep expenses would force them to hew to the line, then that seems like a really great remedy. But if policyholders aren't going to use that, then we need to pull out the big guns, which is the bad faith lawsuits. My instinct is to say the first, but I would like to know more about how claims are playing out and get somebody to run an experiment to see which way this would work best.
I don't know why we can't have both, but Amy didn't put the question that way.
Right.
So,
I'm sure everybody online knows this, but Amy Bach, Executive Director, United Policyholders, leading insurance consumer advocate in the country, leading insurance consumer advocacy organization in the country, supported.
So, hey, Kathy, I see a question from Kevin. I can't quite make out his last name. Can you read Kevin's question for us, Kathy?
And just a reminder, Amy was our first guest that we had. And so you can catch that on our claim game up on YouTube if you want to check it out. So Kevin's question is, given all the hoopla about what quote unquote bad faith, assuming insurance companies can make mistakes, does the severity of the mistake trigger bad faith? And if so, when?
So depends on the state, but I would describe it as severity of the mistake. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but what was the process that led up to the mistake? Was it reasonable dispute about, gee, I think the repairs will take this much? No, I think it'll only take that much. Was it, geez, I'm not even going to bother to look at the adjuster's estimate? Was it, I've got to meet a quota this month, so I'm not going to pay it, so I'm going to pay less? So that's why, as Chip said, bad faith it's not the right term. That's why I like to refer to this as claim practices litigation. What led up to the mistake? What was the process the insurance company engaged in? And was it reasonable or unreasonable?
I think it's a good question in a way, and I think I understand it, but it also depends upon what the actions of the insurance company are. I talk about if an insurance company is going to, and I talked about it in my book, an insurance company that's always going to take betterment when they don't supposed to take betterment. It's against the law, and saving $400 to $500 per time, but they've got 10,000 times a year they're going to do this year after year. Well, it's not just a $425 or $500 time. It's an intentional process that they've done. Visa, versus, they rip somebody off $4 million. It might sound a lot more, but you save a lot more on the 10,000 times the $425 reduction each time. So I appreciate the question, Kevin, from you asking it. I think it depends, and it's a good question. I think Larry Bache had one more question in there that I'll let him. He talks about the NIC as a federal organization. Can you read that for us, Kathy?
Let me pull that up. I've got a couple Larrys in here, so it's hard to.
Oh, it's Larry Burtis that asked that question. Burtis,
it's Larry Burtis. So in a manner, NAIC is a quote federal organization, quasi-governmental organization.
Was that the question?
I think it's just a statement.
So
is that right, Larry? Larry can help us.
The NAIC is a private organization composed of public officials, if you can wrap your head around that one. And oh, by the way, if you go to NAIC meetings or similar organizations, the key is who's sponsoring the cocktail parties. Right? It tells you all they know. But I think, look, I don't know what the law is on this, but as a general matter, when public officials get together and basically make law because they're making model rules and all that sort of stuff, they ought to be held to the same standards of transparency as when they're acting as government officials. So it's a very weird thing and needs to work better.
Yeah, it's a lot of people think that it's a government organization. It is absolutely not a government organization. It's a bunch of government officials who decided to get together. They actually, to their credit, the NAIC has got their minutes all the way back from the very beginning, and they're online that anybody can go back and read and download and search and all kinds of things like that. But it is not a governmental entity, neither state nor federal. It is a private entity itself. So, Kathy, how about we have another question from Andrew Saul? What's that?
Well, Andrew's question is there any difference in behavior between stock and non-stock / mutual companies?
I'd be interested in your reaction to that. So there is some research which suggests, on the whole, in general, enough qualifications, mutual companies pay their top executives less, and in some class of mutuals tend to perform better with respect to claim practices. And that class is, so it's not State Farm. State Farm is a mutual company, right? The largest company in the industry. It's just a world unto itself. And the difference between State Farm and Allstate, there are lots of differences, but at that level, none. Some of these smaller mutuals, there is evidence, not conclusive, but suggestive, that they tend to perform better because they tend to deal with particular communities where reputational value is more important. For the large national insurers, reputational value is not that important. It's price advertising and warm and fuzzy feelings.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, with you on that, and I can't get too deep into it, but for disclosure reasons. But I will say this: that there are a number of mutual insurance companies that, while their stated compensation to their executives are one thing, many of them have outside consultant agreements and management clubs and all these other things that most people, if you're dealing in the SEC, would be outlawed. You'd have to explain all those things, but because they're private mutual companies, they have these contracts. So don't kid yourself about what you think somebody might be getting paid versus what they are. The one big example of this that I could talk about was with Hank Greenberg and AIG, where one of his star companies, despite the fact it was against federal law, he was still getting paid as a consultant the same way he and a number of other people were for decades, and that shouldn't have happened. But I also know, Jay, a number of very small reputable companies on the mutual side that people stay in line for years to become a member of if they could, but they aren't the major insurance companies, nor are they accessible except for very few people to go join.
Yeah, a lot of these started out with fraternal organizations or guilds or all the lumbermen or the farmers in an area, and some of them still have that legacy. Yeah, right. Sometimes it's tough to get in, but yes, they tend to be quite responsible.
We're talking about, model laws, but, is it realistic to think that we are going to get any reform? We've been talking about this for a while. You've been writing for a while. I often think we're going to get reform, but my law practice doesn't seem to be slowing down, and neither does the claim practices. I mean, are we just whistling Dixie on this, Jay? Is it just going to be this way, or what?
Well, I think things have changed. You've seen that in some states for the better, some states for worse. I read something today about issues in national politics, which probably apply to this, which is, sometimes on some issue it may be hard to have hope that things are going to get better soon. Well, you don't actually need hope. All you need is courage. You get up in the morning and you litigate insurance bad faith cases or ordinary claim cases, or sit in front of your computer and write books. And it's sort of what we do in the expectation that, this is important work. I'm not good at predicting how much impact it's going to have on anybody, but we're not afraid to try it. And for most of us, might not want to admit it, we sort of like it, right? It's what we're good at. It's what we do. It's not just a job. So are we going to see change soon? I don't know. But we do what we do.
It's not going to stop you from at least seeking it.
Right. Exactly.
So, I've invited a number of policyholders to show up, and I think eventually a number might, look at this, especially I can imagine out here, I'm out in California right now with all the wildfires that have gone on, and it's just at that stage where people are 4 or 5 months after, the incident, and things aren't quite going right. What is it that policyholders, Jay, in your experience, should be? What are warning flags, red flags that, wait a minute, that I'm not getting treated right? Should I go get professional help or not? And what can they do? What can they do to stop all this that might be happening to them?
Yeah, well, it's hard for people to know, because very often people say, well, gee, my insurance company says I'm not covered. I guess I'm not covered because they're the expert. So what they should do is look to reliable sources of information. State insurance departments put out some of that, particularly after disasters. United Policyholders will be out there, in the fairs and stuff, putting out that information. I would look at that. Some of the other consumer organizations do that as well. So it needs just a little bit of education. And if you see that it's happening not just to you, but it's happening to your neighbors, then you start to think, okay, this is not me. This is the system, and I don't like the system. And you can organize either as neighborhood groups. We've seen those after a number of disasters. Join the national groups like United Policyholders. And you can complain, right? Politicians listen. I don't know why, different politicians who are generally pro-industry have all of a sudden gotten interested in attacking insurance companies. But I would guess it's because their constituents were complaining. And contact your insurance department, contact your legislator, contact your senator, contact anybody, because if they hear enough of this, they're going to do something.
Well, they can't complain about me about denying the claims. I didn't have anything to do with that. The insurance companies love to complain about me, but it's only for suing them, for this, and then they want to say I'm the bad guy for bringing all these claims. Is a lot of that just propaganda, or what's the deal, Jay?
Well, so I would ask myself, gee, how does Chip Merlin make a living? Well, he can't make a living by bringing invalid cases, because he would lose all of them. So I don't know if you win all your cases. If you did, you'd be unusual. But if lawyers don't have valid claims and insurance companies haven't underpaid their policyholders, then the insurance companies would win all the suits. Lawyers wouldn't be making any money. So the fact that there's a lot of insurance litigation tells me, there's a problem here. I was just talking to a reporter who did a study. He hasn't published it yet, but it was insurance claims processing in a particular jurisdiction under a particular system. And the number of wins by the policyholders was very small. And I said, I don't know anything about this, but that tells you that there's something wrong with the system. Because policyholders, and particularly policyholder lawyers, are only going to bring claims where they think they have a chance of winning. Otherwise, it's a waste of time and money. So, same thing here. Put Chip Merlin out of business. Pay all your claims. Pay all your valid claims. All of the times he brings suit, prove that you did the right thing. And then there'll be more Merlin Law Group, but it didn't happen in tomorrow.
I think that the Florida Citizens Property Insurance companies come up with a new one by rigging where the lawsuits are going to the administrative courts up in Tallahassee. At one time, they were 40 to 0 in terms of victories. I think there's been, after I wrote a blog about it, all of a sudden, holy cow, a policyholder finally won a case. But so long as I think the insurance, if they could, I bet they would rig what court they would want to hear all the cases in as well. Let me switch this to you. Suppose you were out here in California. Insurance Commissioner Laura came up to you, said, Jay, you have 5 minutes. I want you to tell me what you think the most important thing that I should know and I should do out here dealing with the claims, the wildfire claims, and looking at insurance companies and determining if they're being fair to my citizenry. What should I do? What would you tell them?
So I would say, in terms of the claims process, I don't know what Commissioner Lara has done so far, but I would do a very searching market conduct examination of some of the principal companies where what the state does is they go in and sample the claims files and see how they're behaving, and then impose regulatory sanctions if they're not behaving properly. And if they're not, and you think the rules need to be strengthened, strengthen the rules. That's my first 2.5 minutes. My second 2.5 minutes of my 5 minutes is, that's with respect to the claims process. Now, you've got a bigger problem than that. You've got to figure out the economics of property insurance in California in light of climate change and potential earthquakes. And you're not going to make everybody happy, but given that we have a basically private insurance market, you've got to figure out a way to give enough people enough coverage and the insurance companies to make profits. Now, as we talked about before, maybe that's a standard policy with limits, because they can't cover everything because everybody can't afford that. But that's the long-term question. So if he calls, I'll let him know.
All right. Well, maybe if he doesn't, we'll try to go see him and just type up what you said, okay? So, but maybe I can get him to have him call you, okay, Jay? How about this? I want to look a little into the future, because, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence now, and it's actually, for us in our law firm, it's here. I mean, we're using it. We're using it, learning how to use it better. I think it's here in many industries. What do you see regarding the increasing use of artificial intelligence and the automation of claims? Is it going to improve it? It's going to worsen it? How do you keep it ethical? What's the deal on this?
So what regulators need to do is to make sure that they're not outgunned in this process. So, hard enough to understand insurance. Do they have the expertise to evaluate the algorithms, the artificial intelligence, all of that sort of thing? The answer now is surely no. I don't know how they get that. It's hard to build that in-house. Are there outside consultants or something? What kind of disclosures do you want the insurance companies to make? Because we've seen this already with big data. Sometimes the insurance company doesn't know how the algorithm works. It just produces the product of here's the greater risk. So they've got to catch up. And that's the key to figuring out what the answer is. Because otherwise, insurance companies are going to use it as a tool, sometimes for good, sometimes for not so good, and they're not going to be able to do anything about it.
So I know that we try to keep this to right around an hour, and we might be going a little bit, but let me ask you, if somebody was to ask you what the biggest misconception about insurance is and what people have about insurance and what the truth is about insurance that you want to bring to the public light, what would you say to them? Biggest misconception the biggest thing we got to do, what's the truth that needs to be brought to the public light?
So the biggest misconception is people think of insurance like a bank savings account. You ought to get out what you put in. No. If you're lucky, you'll never get a dime out of it because you won't suffer a loss. Now, we know that can be true in homeowners insurance. In health insurance, what you put in has no relation to what you get out because it depends on your illness or injuries. So don't think of it that way. And that relates to what people really need to understand. So the oldest property insurance company in the United States is the Philadelphia Contribution for the Protection Against Fire, founded by Benjamin Franklin in the 1760s, which was a group of Philadelphia homeowners getting together and saying, let's pool our resources. In case one of us has a loss, we're all sharing the loss. Every insurance type, every insurance company operates exactly like that now. What people ought to understand is this is a means by which the community gets together and shares risk to protect each other. And let's think about how the community ought to do that, not how Allstate can make a profit, not how I can make the most of my insurance claim, but it's a collective community endeavor. And when when Commissioner Lara or the state legislature or Congress redesigns insurance commissioners, that's the starting point.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate the fact not wanting to collect on insurance. I tell people I buy more and more life insurance the older I get because I don't think the insurance companies want to pay off more and more money, so I just keep buying more. So, hey, Jay, it's been really fantastic. I want to give you, is there any last things that you'd like to share with us on what you've been working on and or any words of wisdom for policyholders out there?
Well, I think we've covered a lot, and I think the most important point we made is people ought to pay attention. And people ought to pay attention to what's happening across all different lines of insurance. And then we can get together and figure out how to fix it.
Well, making insurance work for all of us, I think is what it's about. I agree with you. It's one of the most important social human products that we've ever made, and it's for the benefit of all of us through that peace and security that you talked about early on in our discussion. I have just a world of gratitude for you for all the work that you've done and your ability to explain it so that it makes a lot of common sense. And if you haven't picked up Jay's book, I'd strongly encourage you to go and get the Delay, Deny, Defend. It's just a tremendous read. It's backed up by a lot of research. And Jay, I'd encourage you to do more. I think you're a great educator, and what you have to say in your study, I think, helps all of us. And I hope someday it really will benefit us. It's even greater, and maybe we can get rid of these bad claims practices.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate the invitation to get to talk to folks today.
God bless. Take care, Jay.
Bye.